Welcome to lesson 1 of drawing a residential building permit set. I'm Chris, an architect based in the UK, and I'm excited to guide you through creating a clear, compliant and professional permit set from the ground up. In this lesson, we'll cover the foundations, starting with what a typical residential submission includes, then moving into the first sheets that you'll create, the cover sheet, the legend and the site plan. We'll begin with an overview of a standard residential permit set, along with a quick note on how your requirements will vary by region, so you can adapt the process to your own local authority. Then I'll show you how to set up a clean, well-organised cover sheet and legend in Rayon. Next, we'll build the site plan foundations. We'll import a site plan to scale, add property lines, setbacks and surrounding context. Next, we'll import the existing property floor plan to scale, and then add existing property images so the reviewers can understand the project context. These steps will set the baseline for lesson 2, where we'll draft existing and proposed floor plans. Now, I'll be demonstrating everything in Rayon Design. It's the same platform that I use for every sheet in this course. It's the fastest way to create accurate architectural drawings, all the way from complete presentation ready permit sets with images, documentation and schedules. And it's an all-in-one web-based tool. Rayon's free to use, so you can follow along step by step by creating your account at rayon.design. Be sure to open the free permit set template linked below. It's fully editable, so you can follow along, adapt it to your jurisdiction and start building a reusable permit set structure. Let's get started. This is the building permit set. So you would have opened Rayon, and this is what the browser looks like. We've got our building permit template there. So if you download that from the link below, this is what it will appear like. So we'll go into here. It will just load up for a second and we'll jump into the paper space. Now, I'll do two things in this first part, and one is to talk about the general contents of the building permit set, and two is about the differences between the model space and the paper space. So first of all, I'll run through what the permit set actually includes. So we have document that basically goes to the council, to your local jurisdiction, and this is to ask permission to make a change to a building or to add a new building. And then in this case, this is an existing cottage. We are looking to refurbish it, so we're upgrading the fabric of the building. And we're also adding volume to the building, so adding dormers to the upstairs to provide a new ensuite and a new dressing study space alongside, renovating the building. So in terms of the documentation, we start with a front page. So this gives an impression of the existing building, how it looks, and gives a very brief sort of description about the works that are going on, where it is, who it's by, what council it's going to, really clearly set out. We then jump to a legend. So that's very much the sort of contents of the document, a sort of precedent image, some examples of the drawings that we'll be seeing, and then a list of submission requirements. And this will vary based on the geography that you're at. So your local jurisdiction will have a list of requirements for planning, so please have a look at those. And obviously for the UK, our councils have their own lists as well. So you need to make sure that you check those before submitting your application. One thing that they will always have is a site plan. So in the UK, for example, we have a location plan and a block plan. So you have a location plan to basically locate where you are in space. So this is a much larger scale drawing, and then you have a slightly closer in drawing to show the adjacencies, so show where your neighbors are, show your position in the street, for example. So we have those two there. We then obviously have the existing building, so you have to set out the existing building on the site. So these are the existing elevations for the house, have the existing plans and sections, and these will either be provided by a surveyor, so someone that goes out and measures the building, or the architect can do that as well, and we'll need to draw up those plans. We then have the existing and the proposed, and obviously showing the existing and proposed next to each other is really helpful because it shows the sort of before and after. So as I said, alongside sort of upgrading the fabric of the building, we are installing these 2 new dormers to the bedrooms. So at the moment, the upstairs of the building hasn't been touched for quite a long time, and so we're really trying to bring this space up to date, have a decent master suite with ensuite bathroom, and then have a guest bedroom with dressing space and study space as well. We then have existing and proposed, so we have the demolition drawing, so what we're going to be removing from the building and then what we're going to be installing. And obviously a really clear way to highlight that is with color. So we just take the drawings, duplicate them and add color to those zones. We then obviously have the elevations, the proposed elevations, so that we can see the new dormers that are being set there, so understand the mass of those and understand how they appear from the street. And then we have some really lovely sections, so this really gives understanding of how the internal space works and the feeling of being in that space for the users, and understand the impact of the new dormers on that space. So we have one going one way, one going the other way. And this might not be something that's strictly required in the UK, but we've included it because it is required in other jurisdictions. So we've included for new windows and scheduling out those new windows. I mentioned that we wanted to upgrade the fabric of the building. So we also have new doors going on internally, and these are all scheduled out, a similar sort of template, how they're formatted, the sort of plan elevation section, and also some examples of construction details. And these obviously give an impression of what you're going to be changing, the aesthetic of that, and the technical requirement of that. And then finally, a series of mood board images. So, inspiration around the dormers, the internal quality, the materials that you're going to be using. And then we end on this sort of final sheet to clarify, again, what we're asking permission for. And then, a lovely sort of precedent image again. The really good thing about Rayon, and, it's something that I always go back to, is that I can do this all in one document. My typical process as an architect is to draw all the drawings in one thing and then do all the visuals and the setting out of the documentation in another. So this completely negates that requirement, and I can do it all in one tool and share it with my team, and it's all based in a browser. So this is the paper space. If you see here, under canvases, we have a paper canvas and we have a model canvas. So within the model canvases, that's where all the drawing information lives. So all of our individual elevations, even our images, our plans. So this is all the existing set. And then we have the proposed set. So that's where all our drawn information lives. And that sits next to our site plan. So this is all one-to-one. So this is not drawn at a scale. This is a true scale drawing. And if you imagine the paper space, we're basically taking a snapshot of those drawings. So just as an example, I'm basically here on this sheet looking through a view, and you can see on there 1 to 1250. So just as an example, I'm going to zoom out. So this is basically me looking back at that model canvas that we just looked at. So that's the only thing that you need to remember when you're thinking about the differences between model canvas and paper canvas, is that the model canvas is where you draw things, and the paper canvas is where you kind of look through things, where you're looking back and creating your sheets. So I can just there go type 1250, and now I'm back to it. And similarly with those, we're just looking through a viewport that references back to that model canvas. Obviously, the other thing we're doing here is setting up a series of sheets. So each of these pages is an A3 page. So that's a 1-to-1 scale. So that's a true A3 page. We're then adding a drawing sheet to that, and then we're adding these views to those sheets. And it all lives very neatly, very tidily in this document, which I can then export individual images as, or export it all as a PDF, or even export it as a presentation. Now, as I said, this will be all part of the template that you're provided at the link below, but please remember that your local area will have a different list of requirements. So this really is a starter for 10. We've provided all of these things to illustrate how to do it, and it's a really helpful tool, but just remember that your local area will have different requirements, so please check those first. Okay, so we've given an overview of what is included within this permit set. So let's jump in and talk about the first 3 pages of this set: the front cover, the legend, and the site plan. Okay, so I'm going to be setting up the building permit foundations. So throughout this course, I'm going to be creating each of the drawing sheets so you can understand how to do them yourselves. So we're going to be starting by setting up the permit cover sheet, the permit sheet legend, and then the existing site plans. So we'll get started. So we're going to go for a new model. So just in your own personal Rayon file, you'll have new model. That will quickly create a new space for you, and you automatically start in the model canvas. And as I said before, the model canvas and the paper canvas are different things. So for the front cover page, we'll jump over to the paper canvas, and it will come up with the message, your paper canvas doesn't contain any pages. So we'll create a page, and we want an A3 page. And as I said, that is a true A3 size. That's a 1-to-1 scale. We can start to add a frame, for example, and have a solid fill. So we could have a slightly grey fill, and we could bring that in by a set amount. And you'll see that the page snaps to different aspects. I'm just going to turn off the stroke. And now we can bring in the image that you saw earlier. So we can bring that into the model canvas, for example. And if we just go to import image, and you can see that image on my desktop, that's that. So that will live in the model space. And obviously if I'm drawing from my survey information, so if I'm drawing existing elevations, I could have a series of photos set up that I can be referencing. So we'll jump back into the paper canvas, and the best way to add a view, so we go to layers, we'll go to plus there, and we'll go to view. So a view from the model canvas. And as I said, in the paper canvas, you're basically creating a series of views that are looking back at the model canvas. So you can see there, that's all we have on our model canvas. So that's quite easy. And then we can crop that view. So if you hold a command key while you're doing this, this will crop the view of that image. I can obviously scale that view down. There we go. So that'll be a nice, neat setup. And then obviously we can add the information that we want. So the title. So now we can add the title to the front cover. So we just add text, click where we want it, countryside house, we'll call it. And as with everything in Rayon, there are different styles. So styles really are the big thing. And we can see over here on the left-hand side, we have styles for shapes, styles for walls, styles for text and annotations. We can create a new style for title. So, and we can say it's a certain size. We'll call it 1 or 2 maybe. And then we can say, actually, there's a different style, which we could call, so we detach the style from that one, create a new style, and we'll call it body, for example, 0.5. And then you can see in that left-hand pane that we have our styles there. So even if I was to start to write something in this style, I could then change the style. You can see on that right-hand side, there's a pick style. So I could then pick the style that I wanted. And the style tool is a really, really helpful thing. And it's relevant in annotations, in walls, in all different types of drawings. Okay, so we've just added a description of what the works are. So the proposal seeks a plan permission for dormer extension, And this is obviously for the council. It gives an explanation of what you're asking for. And then I'm just gonna create some subheadings. So again, I can detach that style of text and I can create a new one and I'll call it subheading. And I'll say, actually, this wants to be, what should we say, 0.8, yep, something like that. And we'll call, we'll say we want reference, maybe project team. I can just make something up for now. And then, like I said, for that lower piece of text, I can do pick a style and then go in there. And obviously you have the same sort of snaps, alignment that you would be used to in other tools. Okay, so I've just adjusted the text slightly, added in the information. So we've got the address, the local council, the reference number and the project team. And looking at it, the text maybe is a bit strong. So I can go back into the body text, for example, and I can adjust the color to be sort of a mid-gray, something like that. Knocks it back a little bit. And obviously any of those text boxes that follow that style will be affected. So you can see there where I've changed the color. Anything that is noted as body text goes back to that style. And similarly, maybe this subheading should be in the subheading style. So I can do that and I can just tab onto pick a style and use that. And now we've got a nice sort of set out series of text pieces. There's a hierarchy to it and it sits, well as a sort of cover page. Okay, so now on to the legend page. So this is really the contents of the document. So again, we can go back to layers, which is up here on the left. We'll go to new, we'll go to page. And again, we can set it out as an A3. As I said before, it will snap and align as you like, so you can keep a nice sort of orderly paper space. And again, I mean, a really helpful thing for me is that we can basically copy, so I'll just double see that, copy that across, and now that's kind of my frame for information. So I can just go in here and type legend instead, and I've got my sort of format set up. Now, just like we did before, we can go back to the model canvas and we can import another image. So we can go to import image, and you can see my example image there. And similarly, that can sit here. We'll go back to our paper canvas. And again, we can move our crop around here, and that keeps that same crop boundary, and it's just looking at a different area of the model sheet. So we can then go into this section and start thinking about the individual pages that we're going to have. So O1, O2, O3. And obviously in setting this out, I can move the boundary of that text over and say, actually, I'm going to have 2 columns of text. And we'll just change that to, and as I go, I can populate those pages. So, you know, if we know, for example, we're going to have existing site plan, existing building elevation. Okay, so we've got the front page and we've got the legend sorted out. So now I'm going to start thinking about the site plan. So we're going to jump back to the model canvas. So let's jump back here. So we've got those 2 images that we had in there previously, and we can go to import. So I know that I've previously purchased the OS map. So in the UK, for example, there are people that sell the digital data, so the DWG files for your location plans. So we can go to import, and we'll go to DWG, just go to my desktop, and we'll go to site location plan. So when we go into import, we go to a sort of temporary window, so it's converting the DWG, and you can see that here. Now it's asking me to pick a known length by setting 2 points. So I can just double check, for example. So I know, for example, that the grid to grid point of here is 50 meters, and that's what it's coming out at. So that's looking good. I'll press OK, and then I can pick an insertion point and say that's here. Now you can see that's obviously coming in much bigger than the images, but that's because it's 1-to-1 in the model space. So this is a big site, and our property is only one small portion of that site. This is a road coming through with a roundabout and a series of properties, and this is our site here. Now in the UK, we would have a red line boundary. So that basically delineates what is your application site, and a big thick red line would basically show the council this is the application area. So I'm going to quickly add a polyline. So that was the tool down there. We can add a stroke, so make that red, make it nice and thick. And then I'll just trace these lines for the site boundary. And obviously because it's a polyline, it's a continuous line, which is helpful. There we go. And I can set that as a style again. So as you know, just with the annotation points, I'm creating a line style. So I'm going to save a style, and I'll call that application boundary. The other thing I'm going to do is just put the import layer to the back. And that means that the import layer is obviously the import that's come in. And that means that my red line will appear on the top of that. It won't be interfered with by those original black lines. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is import the existing floor plan. So again, I mean, for this project, for example, we've had a surveyor go out and measure the existing property. So again, I'm going to go to import DWG and go to house survey. Now again, I can select 2 lines, for example, so I know, for example, yep, that looks good. Pick an insertion point. I'm just going to put it over here for a second, and you can see that comes in as it does. Now, what I want to make sure is that that comes in on a different layer. So I'll go to add layer, I'll call that house, because I don't want to get it muddled up with the site, for example. So I'll make sure that that goes and sits on the house layer. I also want to make sure that it's grouped. So if you select all of it and press group, that will keep it all together. Because obviously when people draw the plans, it's coming in sort of perpendicular to the lines. But the reality is when you're looking at a site plan, north is normally up. So our house position will be rotated. So I want to place this and I want to rotate it to make sure it aligns with, the existing house position. And you may find that the OS data is slightly inaccurate to the plan data that you've got, and that's because of the scale of the drawing that the surveyors use it. There will be discrepancies, but we look like we're pretty close, and we're trusting the on-site measurement. So that gives us our house plan, and then we've got the garage off to the side. And obviously we can keep adding to these drawings to add a bit of depth, add a bit of colour, and show a bit more of the realities of the site that isn't just this sort of base level of information. So in the editing tools down here, there's one called Bucket. And this is very much like the sort of paint bucket tool that we're used to. And what I can do is basically start to fill in the building forms. This is obviously a really quick, helpful way of doing it. So obviously anything in that is a continuous shape, I can fill because that's what it's reading. And obviously in all of this, all we're trying to do is communicate very clearly what's built form and what's not, and in the context of the site, for example. Okay, so with those, the built form selected and filled, we could now add a fill layer to the background. And I could do this one of two ways. So I could go through individually, filling each plot, for example, or because of the sort of the layer nature, I could create a polyline, and I could basically trace the outline of the site. And this basically creates an overall shape that we can then again add a fill texture to. And you can see here, for example, we can add a fill, probably not bright red. Let's make that a sort of light grey colour. We'll remove the stroke, new layer in here, and call that background. And then I can make sure that the fill layer is on the background layer, and then I'll drag the background layer to behind. And obviously those layers are then stacking up nicely. We can also set that as a style. So as before, we can save the style, and we'll call that background, that will be site background. And where I've got a new polyline, I can do pick a style, and that follows the same style. Again, we could go back to the paint bucket tool, we could fill in the paths, we could fill in the road, and as before we could maybe set these ones as a new style and call them path, and say they're a slightly darker grey, and then again we could set the roads as a different style, and again do that as a slightly different. Okay, I've just spent some time filling in the different areas, so the site backgrounds, the roads and the pathways, and I still want to add a bit more life to the drawing. So I can go into blocks, so blocks is on the left hand side here, and the block library is just like the godsend in terms of Rayon. It's all the sort of existing blocks that all live in Rayon that are really, really helpful just to be able to drag and drop onto your drawings. So we'll go and try and find some trees. So you'll see down at the bottom there's vegetation, and I want quite a simple tree that's going to work well. Let's go for elm tree. Yep, that looks good. I mean, you saw I just dragged and dropped. I can go in and I can adjust the style. Say these actually wanted to be green. Maybe that's a sort of, there you go. Just add a layer, call that vegetation. And obviously put them on layers is really helpful because then you can turn them off if you wanted to. So just make sure that's on the vegetation layer. And then I can start populating the plan again. And obviously because that's on the layer at the top, those are going over the boundary lines. And obviously whilst I'm doing this, I can be looking at Google Earth, for example, to see where that vegetation sits within the drawing. Okay, so I've just spent a little bit of time refining the drawing. So finalising the trees, adding a bit more sort of life to it, adding the shadows, and here we are with it as it stands. So the final thing I want to do is just highlight the existing building And I can do that with the polyline. So again, just want to add a sort of semi-transparent fill, and then I can go to fill, I can add a solid red, I can change the opacity of that. So that obviously helps it stand out on the page. And I want to give it some overall dimensions. So we can go to dimension here. I just want to click on here and here. And I can change the dimension style. So just like we have the styles in all the other aspects, we have annotation styles that we can change our dimensions in. So I want to change the unit length to meters, because obviously we're talking about a large site. I want to change the text to red. I'm going to change the line to red, and I can change the size as well. And again, I can use the pick a style tool to then match that to the other. So that's my site location plan sorted. And now I can go back into the paper canvas. So with the paper canvas, I've got my other two sheets already set up. So my front page and my legend. And what I can do is create another page. So create another page. I will set that to an A3 again, align it to keep everything neat and tidy. And then I can go to blocks. In the block library, scroll down to title blocks. And obviously because this is now a drawing, I'm going to put it on a drawing sheet. Within title blocks, I can search for A3, just add a simple title block to the page. Now, I want to obviously add my site plans in. So go back to the layer tab and I'll go to view. So again, we're going to be taking a view of our model canvas. So you can see their model canvas and in it comes. So I'm going to have a smaller scale plan, so 1 to 1250, and then a larger scale plan of 1 to 500. I'm going to command and then drag, and that crops that view. And then I'm just going to copy the view over, command and drag to create a larger scale. And let's double click into this one with my mouse, find my overall sheet, and then you can see on this right hand side is the scale. So I want a 1 to 1250 plan, and that's part of the planning application requirements. So as part of the submission to the council, they ask for a location plan, which is that scale, and a block plan, which is 1 to 500. So now I know that's 1 to 1250, and I can just drag it to fill my space. And similarly with this one, I want to set that at 1 to 500, and exactly the same, I can set that. So with those two set, I could even add in a third view, which gets even closer. So again, I can command, drag, crop. Maybe with this view, I could say there's a 1 to 200. There we go. Thanks for joining me in lesson 1 of drawing a residential building permit set. Today, you've got a clear foundation for your permit set, the cover sheet, the legend, and the site plan, and learned how to organize these critical first pages for a smooth submission. Remember, organize your permit set clearly from the start to make the reviews faster and easier, and build your site plan with precision by adding accurate property lines, setbacks, and context. And the best part? You don't have to start from scratch. If you haven't already, download the free editable permit set template linked below. It's your head start for creating professional, compliant drawings that you can adapt for any project. If this lesson helped simplify your process or sparked new ideas, leave a comment and let me know. And don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the upcoming lessons. Next up, we'll be diving into drafting the existing and proposed floor plans, where the design really starts to take shape. Until then, keep working smarter, not harder. See ya.